late night comedy landscape is changing, most recently with David Letterman hosting his final show. But the way we laugh at some of the issues presented on late night TV may be changing as well. Joining us for First Person is Dannagal Young, Associate Professor of Communication at the University of Delaware. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Other than Vice President Joe Biden, Delaware leaders rarely get on late night TV, but way back in 2009, then Congressman Mike Castle was featured on the Colbert Report. Take a look.
Switching gears, what about guns? I think there should be some gun control. I think Congress shall make no law, sir. People who have criminal backgrounds or mental illness backgrounds should not be able to acquire guns.
Crazy people are still Americans.
They may be Americans.
So they have rights. They have all the rights of other Americans.
But they should not necessarily have guns in that circumstance.
But that's infringing. Are you by any chance rethinking this interview?
I am, yeah, every now and then
At some point, a couple times?
Every now and then I rethink the interview for sure.
All right. Congressman, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate it.
Let's put Delaware on the big board!
And so there we have Stephen Colbert and Mike Castle. Mike Castle, the good sport in that. So, Professor Young, how is late night comedy affecting our politics? Is the impact changing?
Well, I would say there's a couple different pieces of late night comedy to look at. First is you have exposure at a national level to politicians and political personalities that maybe people wouldn't normally have exposure to, like Mike Castle, right? And that especially came through on his segment Better Know a District,
right.
Which gave a wonderful platform to all kinds of local politicians that hadn't had a national stage. But then there's the content itself, the satirical content itself. I would argue that the effects of political satire are usually pretty consistent. What we do see now in the environment we're in now is more rebroadcasting of clips, sharing of clips, more exposure to clips through social media, through news, actually rebroadcasting segments from the shows. So it's not just a one-time dose that people get when they watch the show. The technological environment has made it so that you can get exposure through all different platforms.
Is it different because, you know, Saturday Night Live has always done political humor, but now it's more anchor at a desk delivering newsy, you know, kind of news in a funny way, and using that as comedy. Does that sort of change the way it's perceived because it's somebody sitting at an official desk rather than a stand-up?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I would say a lot of what we see in terms of the Stewart model, the John Oliver model, and the Colbert model, they all are sort of throwbacks to the Weekend Update genre, right? So it's quite different from a sketch comedy segment where you'll have a parody or an impersonation of a political candidate. I think more than anything, the reason that genre has been popularized, of the person behind the desk, is because I do think that there is a frustration, especially among younger audiences, with the traditional news format, the genre, and some of the norms that accompany that kind of news. Like, it's very dramatized, it's very sensationalized, and I think that they're tapping into a thirst for something different.
And we've seen, I guess, some research that a lot of where young people are getting they're not sitting down and watching Brian Williams or whoever it might be at 6 o'clock. They're getting their news from a Jon Stewart, from a Stephen Colbert, from a John Oliver.
Interestingly, you're right in the fact that young people are not watching the network news shows. That just is not a staple of a young millennial diet. However, those people who watch John Oliver, Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, even the network late night shows, those young people or those viewers are actually more likely to be consuming other kinds of news. So we try to be careful about saying they're not getting their information from the news anymore. Really, late night comedy is a nice supplement because, especially for Stewart and Colbert and Oliver, you would not understand their content if you didn't come to those programs already informed
with
about
some context.
Exactly, exactly. And so the viewers of those shows, interestingly, they are NPR listeners, they are people who watch cable news programs, and they get a lot of information online.
You mentioned the sort of informed presentation of somebody like, say a John Oliver, and we have a clip from from Jon Stewart's protege, John Oliver, and his HBO. Let's take a look at Last Week Tonight.
Look, is it any wonder that American students are sick of tests?
Teachers have reported kids throwing up, and it's the pressure.
That's true. In fact, this happens so much that official instructions for test administrators specify what to do if a student vomits on his or her test booklet. And something is wrong with our system when we just assume a certain number of kids will vomit. Tests are supposed to be assessments of skills, not a rap battle on 8 Mile Road. Oh, Eminem, why did your mom make you spaghetti? She knew tonight was rap battle night.
Oliver there addressing a major issue in his own way, very well sort of sourced and informed, but not necessarily in a right or left, taking a position on, but really presenting and lampooning an issue that is getting a lot of attention.
I actually am fascinated by what John Oliver is doing right now. And when people lament the departure of Letterman and the movement of Colbert and the departure of Stewart, I point to John Oliver as a potential model for where things are headed. Because what he's actually doing, if you notice, he's not taking the top headlines of the day and making a funny twist on it. Right. He's actually introducing original investigative content that is done using his staff of researchers, journalists, wonky folks who actually provide originally sourced information, primary source information, to expose and highlight, hypocrisies or other kinds of controversies that people really generally haven't heard about.
And so you think, as we wrap up here, the future is sort of more in that direction, more of that kind of informed comedy?
Absolutely, because I think that people are realizing that there is something really nuanced and interesting about providing new information in a humorous, satirical way, and it can really expose or illuminate issues that people otherwise haven't thought about.
All right, and we will be watching. Dannagal Young is an associate professor of communication at the University of Delaware. Thanks so much for joining us on First.
Thank you so much.